Good evening. Thank you so much for coming tonight. I'm Mark Mass. I'm the Dean of the School of Theology and Ministry, and I am delighted to welcome you to our lecture tonight, which is entitled Angels, Demons, Cain, and the Madness of King Saul. But before I introduce our esteemed speaker this evening, I'm supposed to give two plugs, okay? So just bear with me. First plug, next Monday, which is on March 31st, the STM will have its annual Dean's Colloquium, which will take place over in Robsham Theater on the main campus, and it is entitled The Transformative Power of Faith. At this event, the STM is co-sponsoring this event with Catholic Extension out of Chicago. And what we're going to be doing is hearing the personal stories of unsung heroes who have done truly remarkable ministry in some of the poorest dioceses of the United States. So that's next Monday. Please join us if you can. The next day, on Tuesday, April 1st, the School of Theology and Ministry Library, this building, will be hosting an opening reception for our exhibit, which is entitled If Heaven Be Your Destiny, The World of American Catholicism, 1945 to 1965. BC has a treasure trove of stuff like glow-in-the-dark rosaries and things like that. And they're all going to be in the big atrium right behind that wall right there. So if you go out this door and make an immediate right, that atrium space will be full of really interesting stuff that was used and defined the world of Catholic piety between 1945 and 65. Please join us if you can. Now for tonight's lecture. This annual scripture lecture is offered in honor of Dick Clifford, a beloved professor of Old Testament, first at the Weston Jesuit School of Theology, and now at the School of Theology and Ministry, and he has taught at both of those places since 1970. Dick, could you just take a stand here for just a minute and just recognize him? Many years ago, one of Father Clifford's was a young woman by the name of Anne-Marie Kitz. Thanks to Father Clifford's fine teaching and mentorship, Anne-Marie was drawn into further academic study of the Old Testament. In gratitude for his work with Anne-Marie, Dr. Richard and Mrs. Jean Kitz very generously donated this annual lecture in honor of Father Clifford. So Dr. and Mrs. Kitz, could you stand, please? Take a bow here. Let's thank them for this. I have it on very good authority that Jean was the belle of Fond du Lac. Is that right? Tonight, this lecture has come full circle. Our presenter this evening is Dr. Anne-Marie Kitz herself, now a scholar in her own right. And after this event, you will have a chance to buy her book, which is available right outside where the cheese and food is, so take a look, please. I've heard very good things about this. I now have the honor of introducing her mentor and teacher, Father Dick Clifford, to introduce her herself. So thank you for coming.
Well, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you here and also to introduce Dr. Anne-Marie Kitz. She is a graduate of several schools, I want to say. First of all, Boston, the College of the Holy Cross in Worcester, Boston College, Weston Jesuit School of Theology, Harvard a year, and then she got her doctorate at Johns Hopkins University, which is also the place where our other Old Testament professor, Michael Simone, studied. I want to also say the title of the book, Cursed Are You, is a rather intimidating title. And I want to say the book is an extraordinary book. It is a book that deals with first-hand sources with Akkadian, Hittite, Hebrew, and other languages, and it consists of fresh looks at material that is widely neglected by scholars, but texts which are very, very important in the biblical world. And I'm now going, with a little help from a friend, give an introduction that's more formal. Anne-Marie Kitz's interest in the ancient world started at an early age. It began in the 5th grade, when she purchased her first copies of the Iliad and the Odyssey at Our Lady of Victory's book fair in Harrington Park, New Jersey. Although she majored in classics at the College of the Holy Cross and received a Master of Arts in Teaching Classics from Boston College, it was not until she attended Weston Jesuit School of Theology, at that time in Cambridge, that the study of the Old Testament attracted her attention. After graduating with a PhD in Ancient Near Eastern Studies from Johns Hopkins University, her interest turned to the religion of ancient Israel and its theological expression in the Old Testament. This, in turn, led to an investigation into the theological function of oaths and their associated curses, not only with regard to Israel in particular, but also with attention to the ancient Near East in general. Her book, Cursed Are You, The Phenomenology of Cursing in Cuneiform and Hebrew Text, was published just recently, last January, by Eisenbrauns, a very prestigious publisher. Contrary to popular belief, and this is where I am borrowing from my friend, contrary to popular belief, her work is not a sensible guide to cursing your raucous neighbors and their dog that barks through the night. In today's world, everyone knows how to curse without a helpful source book on his or her bookshelf. Even though tonight's lecture bears such an ominous title, Angel, Demons, Cain, and the Madness of King Saul, our speaker would like to offer some assurances. She will not curse anyone, so please relax. Also, all priests in the audience who took precautions and brought their copies of the rite of exorcism, they may feel free to set them aside. Professional intervention will not be necessary tonight. So, without further ado, Dr. Anne-Marie Kitz.
Before I start, I have to tell you, I do put together rather elaborate PowerPoint presentations. And when I was doing a bunch of searching online for particular images, I decided, you have to do Google searches and you have to select what you're searching for. So I put down, okay, images of demons. And then you go and you look for, under Google, you say images. And so I clicked that, and there was this whole mass of wonderful images of demons, and I scrolled down, and my picture was there. so I didn't know what to say, but there I was. I will leave you to determine whether or not that would be in a suitable category in which to place me after this. Okay, well, as you know, the title of my talk is Angels, Demons, Cain, and the Madness of King Saul. And what I hope to do tonight is to discuss and evaluate the origins, activities, and function of supernatural beings in the Hebrew Bible, Old Testament, but in relation to the ancient Near East, particularly Akkadian texts. Now, when I decided to put this lecture together, I realized that for as sophisticated as we all are, for as, let's say, plugged into the internet, everyone knows what a demon looks like. And in this regard, it is an knowledge that we share with those who came before us, for they too could readily portray demons in their art. In other words, they, like us, would certainly know a demon when they saw it. Now, in common parlance, like what we mean when we talk about demons, it is actually describes an intrinsically evil supernatural entity that stalks and on occasion even possesses human beings. It is powerful, it is destructive, it dominates human will, and it bends it towards all things evil. Now, etymologically speaking, and bear with me, this is the only time I'm going to talk about etymology, but it is important for this particular talk. The English term demon actually derives from the Greek noun daimon, and this comes from the verb diomai, and it means to divide. And you would think that, oh wow, this is great, because this could actually indicate the divisive characters of what demons are all about. However, we have to consider other Indo-European languages and see what they have in their root system. Hittite has tash, I know you're all thrilled, and Sanskrit, okay, here's a better one, in turn has dayati. If this is accurate, then all of these Indo-European terms would derive from a Proto-Indo-European root, and that's always called pi for short. And that root is dehtu. I know this is really boring, but it actually expresses a fundamental notion of divide for the purpose of allotting. So given this, I would like to set aside the notion that the term demon and daimon express a character trait. I would propose a partitive meaning in the sense that a demon or daimon is a segment or portion that is divided from a much larger whole. And keep that in mind as we go through all this stuff. One aside, it is important to keep in mind that the Hebrew Bible, Old Testament, does not have a single word like demon in the Old Testament. There's no term that embraces this scope of meaning. And so that might lead us to the false sense that, well, if it doesn't have a word for a demon, then they might not be in the Old Testament at all. Well, I'm here to kind of set the record straight in a different way. Now, this did not stop scholars from using the term demons. And when applied to the Old Testament, it actually got its start in the mid to late 19th century. And this was a time when the British Museum sponsored extensive archaeological excavations in the Middle East. And the most noted of these was the discovery of King Ashurbanipal's library in Nineveh. This discovery led to the actual establishment of a new academic discipline, Assyriology, founded by Sir Henry Cheswick Rawlinson and Sir Austin Henry Layard. And Layard is the one who was the lead archaeologist who actually discovered the library of Ashurbanipal, and he is also credited with deciphering the cuneiform writing system that the Akkadian speakers used. Now, based upon the materials that were found in the library of Ashurbanipal, scholars were able to develop a map of the nations that constituted the ancient Near East. Now, those to which I will refer are the earliest, Sumeria. This is a collective of ancient city-states whose most important city was Ur. They spoke Sumerian, an unclassified ancient language. Assyria emerged about 1,000 years later, absorbing Sumeria into its sphere of influence. At its height, its capital was Nineveh, and they spoke Akkadian, which was a Syrian dialect of this, let's say, East Semitic language. Babylonia soon followed, and they spoke a Babylonian dialect of the Akkadian language. Finally, and Babylon was its capital, by the way. And finally, there is Israel, with its capital, Jerusalem, and they spoke a West Semitic language. Now, at the beginning of the early 20th century, the term demon began appearing in scholarly discussions. The conclusions reached derived from academic assumptions that were popular during the time, and this is the Victorian period. Thus, the Assyria and Babylonia were juxtaposed with Israel. Likewise, the inferior polytheistic religion of the former was contrasted with the superior monotheistic religion of ancient Israel. If texts mentioned any subordinate supernatural beings, then polytheism demanded their identification as demons. Monotheism, however, diminished the need for demons, and the notion of angels rose to prominence. This position eventually led to a well-worn philosophical perspective still seen today. Assyria and Babylonia had demonology, and Israel had theology. And this is a position that was reaffirmed as recently as 2008. Now, given this, I will address my talk I will address this issue pertaining to the existence of the subordinate human beings in the Hebrew Bible through an examination of an Akkadian entity known as the rabitsu. The basic texts I will use are Genesis 4:7, the one who lurks, 1 Samuel 16:14, the Spirit of Yahweh, and 1 Samuel 16:15, an evil spirit from God. Now, the Hebrew terms that I will be addressing tonight are the Hebrew term robetz, the one who lurks, and it's translated as the one who lurks or the lurker, and ru'ah in 1 Samuel 16. That has a range of meanings. It can be translated as wind, spirit, or breath. 1 Samuel 16:15 qualifies the ru'ah with an adjective that is ra'ah, and this means evil. Therefore, the phrase can be translated as evil wind, evil spirit, and evil breath. So let's look now at the Hebrew term robetz, the lurker. Back in 1903, when the eminent cuneiformist R. Campbell Thompson published the 17th volume in the series of cuneiform entitled Cuneiform Texts from the Babylonian Tablets in the British Museum, he brought to the Old Testament community the ability to examine a very important Akkadian text. At the time the cuneiform text was published, he published his 2-volume work with a very ponderous title. This is the title, and I'm not kidding. Devils and Evil Spirits of Babylonia, being Babylonian and Assyrian incantations against demons, ghouls, vampires, hobgoblins, ghosts, and kindred spirits which attack mankind. That's the title. You will be tested later. Now, in this, he translated the infamous bilingual Sumerian Akkadian exorcist series, Udughul, Utukulamnutu, which Assyriologists refer to as evil demons. An eclectic text was published in 2007. Now, this text that Campbell Thompson translated and transcribed presented biblical scholars with the opportunity to examine Neo-Assyrian version of the series in light of the Hebrew Bible. Now, upon publication, biblical scholars found that an individual member of this swarm of evil demons was called Mashkim in Sumerian. And that might not be all that interesting, but Akkadian speakers translated Mashkim as rabitsu. Now, this looks suspiciously like our term robetz in Genesis 4:7. So this got the biblical community, at least Old Testament scholars, we excite easily, all excited. And H. Doom, who was one of the most prominent of German theologians at the time, wrote a book entitled Evil Spirits in the Old Testament. Now, while discussing Genesis 4:7 and the meaning of robetz, he observes that robetz is an evil demonic creature that is presented in animal form. It settles down crouching at the door. Dio Prost promptly agreed with Doom in his book, Genesis. It seems that sin was conceived as a covetous demon that clings to its victims. By 1920, the use of the term demon, whether appropriate or inappropriate, was established to such a degree that most future discussions on the subject always began with the refutation or affirmation of their existence in Israel's belief system. Now, I don't want to leave you with a false impression because not every Old Testament scholar agreed with this position. Among those that disagreed was Klaus Westermann, who proposed that a robetz actually refers to the languishing ghost of Cain's murdered brother. Now, in order to unpack the term robetz, I'm going to have to give you a little background on Semitic languages. Now, Semitic languages all depend upon a root system that usually consists of 3 consonants. As you can see, our term robetz depends on RB dotted S. This has a fundamental meaning of rest or settle down. Now, in Akkadian, you've already seen we have rabitsu, and in Hebrew, robetz. Now, as with all Semitic languages, these roots can be made into verbs. And one particularly informative word in Hebrew is yarbitsini, and everyone knows the English translation of this verb. And the reason why you do is because of this Psalm 23. Is somebody able to see it well enough to read it out for us? No, you can't see it? Okay, well then I will read it out. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. So where in that reading is this verb? I know we have some Hebrew people here, so they can tell you. Okay, go ahead, Father. You can do it. Yeah, he makes me lie down. That's where this verb appears in this psalm. And what's important about this is the imagery with which this term is associated. The Lord, Yahweh, is actually described as a ro'eh, a shepherd. And that puts us, let's say, as his followers, in the role of a sheep in this particular case. So what I'm going to do is to try and unpack the meaning of the root rabatsu or rabats based upon behavior of animals. And this is actually very important because this will help us understand what a rabitsu or robetz is. So based upon animals, at least these types of animals, we learn they function in groups, like flocks. They also move from place to place. They also have temporary residences. And they discharge specific tasks when they are in residence. Once the task is completed, they disappear. Now, the kind of animals that I'm going to be talking about is a class of animals. But I want you to look at these images, and I'd like to get some reactions that you might have to these images. Any reactions to these images? Or horns. What about them? Yeah, they have more than 2 horns. They have 4 horns. Now, these animals are known to actually grow as many as 6 horns, okay? But I was not able to find an image of an animal with 6 horns. So what kind of animal is this that we're looking at here? They're all goats? Okay, well, we got goats and rams, and you're actually right, okay, in the sense that the top 3 are actually sheep. Yeah, and you think, oh my gosh, this has got to be a goat, right? Okay. And they are the fat-tailed sheep, and these are sheep that actually have very big tails, and they store water in there, so they can actually forage in less hospitable areas. And down here, of course, are the goats. And what I'm talking about here is ruminants, this classification of animals. So we're talking about cattle, camel, goats, and sheep. And this is how they behave. Now let's look at a positive image of a robetz based upon some of our modern sensibilities and see whether or not they correlate with the ancient perspective. For us, a positive image would probably be a lamb. And this is because it is, they graze in green pastures. They're highly social animals. But however, they display very tight clumping behavior when they move in flocks, and that's actually going to be important. Its character is good because it is gentle, it has a comforting demeanor. Their strong social needs require at least 4 to 5 other sheep in order to even survive. A sheep cannot survive by itself. And as a subordinate being, it would be called an angel, but we really don't have that, do we? But it would have wings in the ancient world and enjoy positive divine powers. And here's one such creature. It is, here's the sheep with the lion's body and the wings. And it's positive. This is from the Nimrod ivories. Now, a negative robet, according to our sensibilities, is probably a goat, okay? A goat forages in much more difficult and less hospitable areas because of its sure-footedness. It actually digs holes. This I didn't know. I learned a lot about ruminants recently, so. It digs holes and climbs trees. Now, its evil character could possibly be attributed to its independent streak, preferring to range very far during foraging. So they spread out. So this makes them very difficult to corral. Now, as a negative supernatural being, we would say that it would have wings and it would have supernatural powers. Now, this is where we diverge, because this is an example of one such deity. It's a goat because it's here, it's with the tree, and it's standing on its legs, just what goats do. And the thing is, it has wings, but this is not an evil being. This was found in the Ore tombs excavated by the University of Pennsylvania, and this is made out of lapis lazuli and gold. So this was not an evil being. Now that you know that stuff, we will learn one more reference of the Hebrew word rabitsu, and it appears in Deuteronomy 29:19. And I was wondering if I could have someone, can you read this better? Could I have a volunteer? Okay.
Yahweh will not be disposed to forgive him, for the anger and jealousy of Yahweh will exude smoke with fire against him. Every curse written in his book will settle down on him, and Yahweh will blot out his name from under heaven.
And here is our term that it means to settle down, of course. Rabitsu appears here. Now, the key here is, what does this passage mean? Well, this passage actually describes how an angry Yahweh utters into existence a host of curses. Now, these energized divine maledictions then ride currents of agitated smoke generated by Yahweh's consuming fire down to earth. Like burning embers, they settle down on the recalcitrant individual and surround him in a smoldering, smoggy cloud and extinguish his life. Now, to qualify this feature of God's breath as evil would probably not be inappropriate. So, with that in mind, I will now turn to the Akkadian being rabitsu. And I just want you to know that this is not rabitsu, this is Pazuzu. He's been very much maligned since the movie came out in 1973. He is actually a good wind deity, a south wind deity, and I just put him here because he is called an apotropaic figure. He actually turns away evil, and this is a little hole up here because it would have been hung in a doorway or window, because that is where winds would enter a room. Now, what do we know about this rabitsu? Well, like the robets in the Hebrew Bible, Old Testament, the rabitsu had an animal form, and Akkadian was really quite specific about it. A bull could describe a rabitsu. Powerful, a splendid rabitsu looking like a bull. Unlike Hebrew, the goat seems to be another preferred animal. If a rabitsu looking like a goat appears in a house, and that's from an Omen text. On another occasion, a rabitsu need only a goat head, or at the very least, the face of a goat. The rabitsu has the face of a goat. Okay, well. Akkadian texts also make a clear distinction between two types of rabitsus in a way that highlights their behavior. A rabitsu of well-being is attached to the man. A rabitsu of evil is attached behind the man. Now keep this in mind, because even though we have one rabitsu that's good and another evil, they both do the same thing. They attach and tie themselves to the victim's body, a capacity that might actually be related to the RB.S root, in the sense that they settle down on top of a person. They accomplish their task and they seem to move on. Now, references to two strains of rabitsus appear together on some Neo-Assyrian apotropaic figurines. In most cases, the inscription is terse and to the point, its meaning clear. Come rabitsu of good, depart rabitsu of evil. Based on this, well, we come to a wonderful conclusion that rabitsu's behavior exhibits either good or evil behavior. Now, the activities associated with the rabitsu are rather broad. When on Earth, it is known to attack people, the effects of which cause limpness in the limbs or on the sides of the body. If his right side is limp, it is an attack of a rabitsu. He will live. Other times, he chases people down. An evil rabitsu has been set on me, constantly pursuing me. A rabitsu can even settle on a man's side, as this blessing indicates. May Giru, his good rabitsu, go to his side. Or a rabitsu can get annoyed and depart in a huff. The rabitsu of well-being became angry and went up to heaven. So the verbs in these texts are very informative, and they give us a list of activities. Rabitsus attack and pursue. They come and go. They ascend and descend. They also linger. When taken as a whole, all of these catalogs of verbs indicate that they had a very high level of keen mobility. Now, rabitsus could also occupy specific roles. They are rabitsus, evil are they. They come from the Encore temple. They are messengers of Enlil, lord of the land. Now, the deity mentioned here is Enlil, and that's what he looks like in case you want to meet him any day. But anyway, Enlil is a Sumerian term, and it means En, Lord, Lil, wind, wind lord. And he is the one who generates the rabitsus. They are the ones that emerge from the Encore temple. And this is also a Sumerian word meaning house, temple, core, mountain. And this is a ziggurat from the ancient Near East. And this is what a temple would have looked like in Babylon and Assyria. Now, therefore, the rabitsus emerged from the top of the mountain here and descended to the earth, because the ziggurat connected the heaven and the earth. And there they will linger long enough to execute a particular message and then mission and then move on. Interestingly enough, the Encore temple actually existed. It was located in Babylonia in the sacred city of Nippur. And Nippur in the ancient Near East was like Vatican. It's one of the most important places where all the religious activities generally were held. And it's interesting to affirm that it is to this area that the Judahites were deported after the fall of Jerusalem in 587. So during their 70-year exile in Babylon, the writers or the editors of the Old Testament would have actually been introduced or become aware of the evil demon Akkadian incantation series. And you can see from this map, there were 3 deportations, and they were settled in this area here. Now, other Akkadian texts that we have regarding the role of the rabitsu are equally informative. The plea, depart, evil rabitsu, come, good rabitsu. Rabitsus could also torment people, and this is very important because look at the list that we have here. Utuku, Alu, Etemu, Galu, and Ilu, and Rabitsu. You shall not repeatedly sit around him in corners. Finally, a Rabitsu could proclaim divine messages. Isham, the great herald, the fierce Rabitsu of the deities. So now that we look at the roles, this is what they do. In keeping with its subordinate position, a rabitsu performs duties on behalf of a governing deity, and that's usually a wind deity. These roles are messenger, guardian, tormentor, heralds, and these are quite appropriate for such trusted, subordinate, supernatural assistants. And finally, some Akkadian documents actually reveal the manifestations of a rabitsu. And this one should sound sort of very interesting. The breath of an evil mouth has blown into me. It is an evil rabitsu who has been set on me. Here the anger of a deity is expressed as a breath, a wind, a spirit that issues forth from the deity's mouth, and it produces a rabitsu, a separate being. And this being inherits the quality of that evil mouth. It becomes an evil rabitsu, and its role, therefore, is to convey malevolence to the mortal realm on a flow of wind. Now, of course, this sounds very similar to Yahweh's function in the function of curses in Deuteronomy 29:19. Consequently, it's not surprising to find Enlil, Lord Wind, named as the progenitor yet again of such malevolent swarm of windy beings. The evil Sedu, Namtaru, Utuku, Rabitsu beings, they are all products born of the wind lord. Thus, a rabitsu is a constituent member of a flock of supernatural beings that coagulate in order to form a destructive, hostile power. An unfavorable storm rose against the land. It is Sedu, Utuku, Rabitsu, the great ones who pursue people in town squares. So this means that a rabitsu is one of the currents of winds that compose a squall, which may or may not include rain, thunder, lightning, or even dust storms. So let's put into a place our last list that illustrates the rabitsu's physical manifestations. It is a breath, a breeze, or wind. It is one of many gushes of wind that constitutes powerful storms, whether it be a gust front, a windstorm, or any form that a tempest may take. Now keep this in mind when we now turn to the Old Testament. And let's see whether or not the Ruach, the spirit of Yahweh, and the evil spirit of Yahweh share any common traits with its Mesopotamian counterpart. It is interesting that the behavior of the spirit of Yahweh becomes most evident when it is juxtaposed with the evil spirit of God. And what is interesting is that the Old Testament Hebrew Bible does not ever preserve the phrase, good spirit of Yahweh. It never is used. Even so, based on this, we can actually come to a very quick conclusion about the behavior of the Spirit. Well, we think that the Yahweh Spirit is good, and the evil Spirit of God is, well, it's obviously evil, okay? So, what about the other aspects of the Spirit and the evil Spirit of Yahweh or God? Unfortunately, and I was really surprised about this, very little has been written recently on the spirit of Yahweh in relationship to the evil spirit of God, both of whom clearly enjoy a very unique relationship with Israel's deity. Now, the function of the evil spirit in 1 Samuel has been described by various scholars in different ways, some of which I'll just give you a few quotes. Now, it is described as an, quote, objectification of Yahweh's abandonment of Saul, end quote. It is indicative of, quote, God's oversight of human actions that are born of evil. It also expresses the notion that, quote, indirectly it is Yahweh who brings Saul's downfall. Or it represents a spiritual dimension of the struggle for the throne between the two contenders, Saul and David. In addition, scholars have noted that the evil spirit is, quote, neither personified nor does it demonstrate any belief in demons. And that was an observation made in 1995. Rather, the evil spirit in 1 Samuel merely describes an attitude of mind. That's what scholars have been indicating recently. Whatever the case may be, the evil spirit causes Saul to go mad. He is agitated, he is restless, he even raves in his house. So based upon these biblical passages that I put up here for your consideration, we learn that the evil spirit of God and the spirit of Yahweh behaves in a rather similar, engages in similar activities. It actually enters and departs. It comes upon, terrorizes, even kills people. It rests on people. And we will remember, of course, that one Akkadian text that says, an evil breath, the breath of an evil mouth has blown into me. Now, fortunately for us, we are able to learn more about this particular, the ruach of the God and Yahweh by looking at this passage from 1 Kings 22, 19 to 22. And I highlighted just a few words here, just so that you will remember them as I read the text. I saw Yahweh sitting on his throne with all the host of heaven standing beside him to the right and to the left. And Yahweh said, who shall manipulate Ahab so that he may go up and fall at Ramoth Gilead? One said one thing, and another said another, until a spirit came forward and stood before Yahweh. I will manipulate him. How? Yahweh asked him. He replied, I will go out and become a lying spirit in the mouth of all his prophets. Then he, Yahweh, said, you are to manipulate him, and go, you shall succeed. Go forth and do it. Now, based on this, we learn that the Ruach is a member of the host of heaven that surrounds Yahweh. And it appears to be an assembly of winds, because a Ruach is a wind, a spirit, or breath. And one of these members steps forward in response to Yahweh's invitation. Now, we know he's clearly an independent being, for he stands before Yahweh and speaks of his own volition. There is a sense that this is a rather noble little spirit, for out of all the other winds that are present, he alone offers his services to execute his king's request. He is also clever, for he presents Yahweh with a viable strategy to effectively accomplish the proposed assignment. He will become a lying spirit in the mouths of Ahab's prophets, right there. And Yahweh affirms this mission by, he affirms this proposal made by the Spirit. Not only does Yahweh assign him this mission, the Spirit is also guaranteed its success. You shall succeed. Given the character of the task, it is clear that this spirit is an evil spirit of Yahweh, since his duty is to deceive Ahab to his death. Yet, if the spirit is evil, it is an aspect that is conferred by Yahweh the moment he approves of the mission. But the essential point here is that the spirit could not hope to accomplish his assignment without divine approval to go and do. Consequently, if the Ruach is evil in this case, it is evil only to one person, and that's to Ahab, who is the specific target. Now, from this passage, we can put together our list of what a Ruach's role is. It is a member of the divine council of Yahweh. It clearly functions as a messenger. In this example, it is a tormentor, imparting contradictory information to Ahab. Now, on some occasions, a group of ru'ah come together as ruchos, spirits or winds. In Zechariah 6:5, an angel states, do I have a volunteer?
These are the four winds of the sky, which go forth from their positions before the Lord of all the earth.
Indeed, we see that there are multiple winds that constitute the divine council, and the divine council is actually indirectly referenced here in they go forth from their positions before the Lord of all the earth. Now let's look at Psalm 104, verses 3 to 4, and do I have another volunteer reader, please? Okay.
He is the one who sets up the clouds as his chariot, the one who rides the wings of the wind. He is the one who makes his messengers winds, his servants flames of fire.
Indeed. Yahweh here journeys in a chariot that he actually constructs himself out of clouds that are propelled by the wings of the wind, ru'ah. And from this ruchos, these winds, he makes individual messengers. That is, he makes thunder and that convey the message of his anger. He also makes other servants who take the form of lightning. They are the flames of fire. Here Yahweh spontaneously creates these ruchos, these winds, as messengers when he utters his wrathful words shrouded in sounds of thunder. So this is clearly connected with the storm deity image. Now, our final profile of the Spirit of God and the Spirit of Yahweh should look quite familiar according to its behavior, activities, roles, and even manifestation. The Spirit is breath or wind. When a group of these spirits convenes, they form windstorms or thunderstorms, which rumble with flashes of lightning. And isn't this almost identical to the activities of Mr. Rabitsu in Akkadian literature? Now, in light of this, can we justify the identification of a robet in Genesis 4:7 as a demon? Probably not, because if we did so, we would be somewhat compelled to say that the evil spirit of God is a demon too. Of course, we would have great difficulty with that. And what is the core of our difficulty here? Why do we feel uncomfortable with that? Any ideas, thoughts, reactions? Totally stumped? Yes, that's very, very true. And the reason for that is really because we are in the horns of a dilemma of a clash of the ages. It is a perspective that actually pits ancient theology against modern theology. And when I use the term modern theology, I use it loosely because I'm talking about theology. Modern theology is that is very influenced by Greek philosophy. For us, it is particularly disquieting to envision God as the source of both good and evil. This, however, was not a problem for the writers of the Old Testament Hebrew Bible, because they linked the spirit of Yahweh and the evil spirit of God to one of God's most fundamental and important roles to them. So let's consider these 4 passages from the Hebrew Bible Old Testament. I placed them in this order in order that you could see the development of a rationale behind the function of an evil spirit of God. So here in Isaiah, we learn that the spirit, the spirit of his lips, Yahweh shall kill the wicked. And that's important to keep that in mind. Now we learn in Judges 9:23, and God sent an evil spirit between Abimelech and the lords of Shechem. And the man thrust him, Abimelech, through with a sword, and he died. Thus God repaid Abimelech for the crimes he committed against his father. He had killed his father and all his 70 half-brothers and all that type of thing, so he was a very active killer. So this actually tells us the role of the evil spirit of God. So let's look at the process that is actually behind this. And I pulled it apart so you could see how the writers of the Hebrew Bible, Old Testament, viewed this situation, which they sort of found comfort in. God generates the wind, the spirit, the breath, and this act bestows identity on the spirit, the wind, the breath, because it comes from God. It is a spirit of God, the breath of God, but because he's God, a breath becomes a wind on earth. And it is autonomous, but is also derivative. It comes from God, no matter what you do. It enjoys divine sanction because God produced it. Now, if the spirit becomes an evil spirit of God, this is the crux of the situation. The evil here does not indicate its origin. It doesn't originate from something evil, okay? What it does, it describes its mission. And it's a mission that is bestowed by God. He's given sanction to do a particular thing. It's its mission. And the spirit executes evil on God's behalf. Now, we still might be a little uncomfortable with that, but we'll settle this. I'll put your mind at ease. The key here is, with modern theology, and what I mean like the theology that we get in the New Testament, which is influenced by Greek philosophy, has a somewhat radically different perspective. Certainly modern theology does not deny the existence of subordinate supernatural beings, and much like ancient theology, it distinguishes between evil and good supernatural beings. Yet once this is done, unlike the theology of the Old Testament, modern theology identifies evil and good as an expression of moral character. And this necessitates that one subordinate being become intrinsically evil, while the other becomes intrinsically good. When placed within the context of a relationship with the divine, evil is clearly incompatible with God, while good remains compatible with Yahweh. But the two must remain absolutely separate because, in this case, they are oppositional. So it is based on this rationale that the modern designation demon was applied to a presumed intrinsically evil being and an angel to a presumed intrinsically good being. Now, the Hebrew Bible, Old Testament, does not attribute the moral character to the spirit of Yahweh, whether it's good or evil. And let's look here at a passage from Jeremiah 4:12, because it explains the reason why this is so. A volunteer, can you read it? Can you see it well enough? Okay.
A spirit comes forth from me, out of the bare heights in the wilderness, against the behavior of my people, not to winnow or cleanse. It is a wind too strong for these things. Now I myself will pronounce judgments against them.
So here we see that wind comes from, this is ru'ah, wind, breath, comes from Yahweh. And what is its role? What is its mission? Yes, the Spirit of Yahweh issues judgments because I and myself will issue judgments against them. So it's clear that the wind, the ruha, the breath of God is none other than a feature of divine judgment. Now, Psalm 18 is even more interesting, 1843, and the psalmist, who claims to have had some kind of divine power in the defeat of his enemies, describes the effect of such godly wind has on people when it reaches the earth. I will beat them to a fine dust upon the face of the winds, ruchoth is there, and empty them into the streets as mud. So what we have here is that Yahweh's thunderstorms actually unmake humanity. They dissolve them into the mud by turning them back into the dust from which they were made. So that's how destructive they saw the winds of Yahweh. So the key here is that the writers of the Old Testament believed that God was judge of all. And unlike us, they believed that God was involved all the time in their lives, that he could be experienced in daily life every day. And so he issued judgments on his people's behaviors in this world, not the next. And they would never be able to conceive of a God who chose not to be involved in this world. That wouldn't make any sense to them. What they believed was that God speaks his divine messages into being. They are his judgments that convey his rulings to the mortal realms as events. So therefore, these divinely sanctioned servants executed their mission as divine reward, as the Spirit of Yahweh rushed upon David, and or divine punishment, as the evil spirit of God rushed on Saul. So the Old Testament writers did not really make a moral distinction between God's divine servants as intrinsically evil or intrinsically good. There was only one source, and only the nature of their assigned tasks could be assigned as evil or good. So in the end, this means that the Hebrew Bible does not support our modern idea of what angels and demons are. They did not see these as intrinsically evil beings at all. To the ancient Israelite, the evil spirit of God was a physical expression of God's judgment, and it wasn't capricious. You know, he only sends the spirit against people who have sinned against him. For them to deny the evil spirit was from God would be to deny that the evil spirit reflects God's judgment, and that this is a feature of his role of supreme judge of all. And that I've come to the end here, and I will ask you whether or not you would like to engage in some form of application. This is where I go to the New Testament, and I ask you to apply some of this information you learned here today to the interpretation of this text. Do I have a volunteer who will read this for me?
When he came to the other side, to the country of the Gadarenes, two demoniacs coming out the tombs met him. They were so fierce that no one could pass that way. Suddenly they shouted, "What have you done, or what have you to do with us? Have you come to torment us before the time?" Now a large herd of swine was feeding at some distance from them. The demons begged him, "If you cast us out, send us into the herd of swine." And he said to them, "Go." So they came out and entered the swine, and suddenly the whole herd rushed down a steep bank into the sea and perished in the water.
Okay, now based upon my talk, how will we interpret this passage? Any ideas, thoughts? No?
Well, there's an intimacy there. There's a dialogue going on between Jesus and the demons, just like there was between God and the evil spirits.
Absolutely.
There's actually a juxtaposition, and they're like almost not intertwined, but they're close.
Oh, absolutely. Very good. Yes, indeed, that is true. And how do we know that we might be on the right track, that we're dealing with an evil spirit of God here? Because how are these people behaving? How are they behaving?
No one could pass that way. They were.
Yeah, so they were, remember what happened to Saul when he had the evil spirit on him? What happened to him? He was actually raving in his house. And what's interesting is this passage before this is actually the calming of the winds by Christ in the Sea of Galilee. And that's a storm, isn't it? It shows that he is in control of the storm. Anything else here that you could make a connection between what we talked about tonight?
I mean, they're sent.
Yes, and notice the language. Just remember how Yahweh said, go and do it. Do it and go, or whatever he said. Yes, yes. Anything else? Okay, so it's mostly interpreted that this is to emphasize Christ's dominion over the demons. But what is actually happening here? Yeah?
But he's not sending them on a mission, he's expelling them.
Okay,
So that's
yeah.
kind of different from the Old Testament.
Yeah, he's expelling them. Okay, that shows that he does have control over them and authority over them. But what does the expulsion of these demons actually mean? What role?
Well, maybe not the expulsion, but he sends them into a herd of swine, which were sort of ritually unclean, and so maybe it has the ultimate effect of removing sin.
Oh, now you're getting close. Sin. Because what was this about? What was God's evil spirit and his good spirit? What role was that of God? Judgment. So if these demoniacs have the evil spirit of God on them, what does that mean? They are being judged by God just because, or is there a reason?
Because they've sinned.
They have sinned. So what is Jesus' role here? He's forgiving their sins. And he passes them into the pigs, okay? And we know that you can take sin and pass it from one to the other, because in Yom Kippur, you could actually take sins and load it up on one goat and another goat. But who is the ultimate one who took upon sinfulness? Jesus Christ did. So this can be seen as an example of God in Christ forgiving sins and transferring that sin to the pigs, which are then destroyed. So, any other comments or observations on this at all? No? Oh, okay. Okay, well, if you have any questions of me in any capacity, I'd be glad to fudge through some answers. Yeah, sure.
I'm a little confused. How did we go from the Old Testament understanding to, I'm thinking of Job with Satan, and then Satan was almost like a prosecuting attorney. But then when you go to the New Testament, Jesus actually marks out Satan as a fallen angel that fell from heaven with 1/3 of the other angels, and they're condemned forever. So what, I guess my question is, what legacy was Jesus drawing on to speak that, or even the writers of John's Gospel, Revelation? Because I don't see that in here. Like, I don't see that in... Because isn't Satan the head of the demons?
Yeah, that's a very late concept. It actually means adversary in Hebrew. And you'll find that there is times in the Old Testament when the Mala'ach, the angel, is in Kings, is actually recorded in Chronicles as Satan. But that is a later concept where you begin to have the influence of Hellenism, and in the interpretation and understanding what these beings are. And so, yes, you get that moral understanding that it was a fallen angel, and there's nothing wrong with that, that's part of it. But I was focusing on our discomfort with God attributing evil to God when they didn't see it that way. And so in this case, I believe that when I'm so Old Testament, Jesus expels the demons, he's truly forgiving them of their sins. And he is a judge, and he still has authority over that. Yeah, sure.
Would you apply that template to all of the demon expulsions?
Well, you'd have to look at them in each one of the contexts and see on that.
So for instance, in Mark 9, after the transfiguration coming down the mountain, and you have the boy possessed from the time he was young. Are his sins being forgiven? The demon casting him into the fire, into the water. The father is begging Jesus. Is the little child being forgiven his sin?
Well, what do you think now? In this case, why would you think a child would have the sin?
Okay, so it could be, this is a worldview that's blaming the father. But then in the interaction with the father, that doesn't come up. This is very unlike the paralytic, where Jesus says, your sins are forgiven. He says, anything's possible for the one who has faith. Sin is, it strikes me that that's a fairly tortuous way of naming this a forgiveness.
In each context, you have to look at it, but I think that it's going to have meant something to the Jews of that time, because they would have understood that yes, this was one of God's roles as judge and authority over these kinds of subordinate beings, and yes, there is forgiveness of sins, I think, in that. But yeah, it could be a little torturous. I agree. It's not going to fit every single time. Yeah. Father has an observation.
I have an observation and a question. One of the things, you're saying that the default mode of existence of a spirit would be as a wind, it seems. But spirits could also appear like in the Son of Man, that is to say, which is another way of saying in a human shape, right? In a human form. That's one thing. That's an observation. But a question I have is that the traditional way of looking upon the appearance of God, God's appearances in the Old Testament, is in a storm. And one of the elements in a storm, of course, is the wind, the rushing winds. But other elements are lightning and rain and thunder, that is noise. And I wondered how you were stressing the wind part, that would be the messengers or the employees. I tend to call them employees.
Yes.
Of God.
God's
trying
minions.
Bring it up to date of 20th century.
Yes,
21st
employees.
century. But what do you do with the storm theophany, which is a ordinary way, both in Ugaritic texts and also in biblical texts, of divine self-presentation?
Well, the thunder is his voice, and the winds are his message.
His messengers?
Yes, his messengers. Yeah, they're all messengers. They are occasionally described as his messengers, because when you believe that God has a mouth, then and he's so powerful that whenever it comes forth, it can come forth as thunder and lightning. And yes, certainly noise is a feature, the howling of the wind, all that type of thing. So, oh, absolutely, with the rain, but it can't be too much rain because then it destroys things. It has to be just the correct balance of rain. So there's definitely, there's this theory of religion called imagistic religion, and that's where you would have conceptual images, a field of conceptual images that come together to express theological notions. And that's what it is. You have this image of the storm, the wind, thunder, but it's wind that doesn't necessarily have to have clouds or anything. I learned recently that, and it's interesting that there are such things as dust devils. Isn't it interesting that we call them devils? And they occur on sunny, cloudless days and have, just arise out of up currents and down currents of winds. And that would have seemed like some kind of, and we call them devils because it's still that imagery of negative association with these windy beings. So God would have control of all forms of wind, all forms. And then this spirit, when it became the spirit in the New Testament, well, it was becoming, it was more than that. It became a feature of Revelation. Yeah?
So is it your position then that possession and evil as a being, like is commonly thought, is not actually correct? Is that what you're saying in the end?
In the Old
No,
Testament?
in the New Testament, currently, presently.
What, that we have these...
Evil spirits, i.e. Satan, i.e. demons.
Well, for us, they are intrinsically evil, like they are born from evil, so they come from Satan, from Satan. And they are dominating, but at the same time, who has the ultimate authority over them still? Who? God. Certainly, because you can ask them to leave in the name of Jesus Christ.
Right, but would they be messengers or a function of justice or judgment as in the Old Testament?
Oh, no, I wouldn't see that today. No, I was just trying to describe the reason why the Old Testament writers didn't really have a problem with it at all. But then once you get, the Hellenistic, Greek philosophy, application of Aristotle, Plato, etc., we had a refinement of theology, definitely. More sophisticated understanding of how it works, yeah.
I ask this only because it's in your title, Cain. Did I miss it, or did you make reference to Genesis to Cain?
Cain and the Robettes, that's always been identified as an example of a demon in the Old Testament. And for some reason, Old Testament people even today, are very concerned about labeling demons in the Old Testament. I don't know why, but they do. They don't think they exist in the Old Testament. Well, they do, but their perspective was that when they acted, the writers of the Old Testament, okay, they acted with God's authority and that they reflected his judgment for sins that people committed. And so what was the sin with Cain and Abel? He killed his brother. Yeah. And so it was this being that kind of haunted him like the evil spirit of God haunted Saul.
So maybe this is kind of like an obvious question, but so in the Old Testament worldview, was there anything like a problem of evil as we understand it today?
Yes, of course there was. They were very conscious of their sinfulness, etc. The Psalms certainly indicate as much. So yes, of course, there was. But if bad things happened, they thought that the bad things happened for a reason. And
they didn't have any problem attributing that reason to God or to some...
Yeah, because in other words, it's meant to be it corrects me to say, look, I must have done something wrong to get God all upset with me. I need to, pray more deeply to him. I must ask for forgiveness because sometimes the sins might not be immediately apparent to the person who had sinned. But their God was very involved in this world, very much so.